up just a quick, so we can just see that. There we go. I see some thumbs. Thanks, Anna Marie. I see you. And we've also started the recording again. There we go. I see that. Okay. There we go. Okay. I'm going to give it a minute. And then I think we can start going.
I just want to say thank you for the people that have registered. We're standing on 40 response. I see we are 52 people in. So if you haven't registered, please just go to the link and register again. Annelie?
We were 57 earlier on.
Yes, yes, we were.
So we could probably aim to go towards that as well.
Yeah. Annelie, jou hand was op.
Yes, I would just want to ask a question. Hello, it's Annelie Kruse from Santam. Thank you for this session. It's really a lot of information and so valuable. From point of view of the insurance industry and being a corporate citizen, how will this impact, for instance, a Santam? Or how do we contribute to making sure that everyone comply with everything that you've mentioned and legislation and regulations? What is our role in this?
That's a very good question, and I think what would basically be considered would be in the same way as you do with health and safety. You could have verification or third-party verification audits, or you could ask your do we call them your clients, your subscribers, your
insured or clients,
the insureds, right? You could ask of them to demonstrate to you compliance. In other words, submit to you a verification audit or a statement on compliance. If you're not going to look at maybe a declaration on compliance. I think that happens as well. You ask a declaration on compliance with applicable legislation. So this would typically be covered there as well.
Yes.
I think that will probably be I think the most practical way of approaching it. I don't know if it's done in another way. If anyone else knows, what do you submit to your insurance company to demonstrate your compliance? A declaration or a report? Or a certification? If they've got 14,000 certification, it includes legal and other requirements. What you'll see just now, it includes legal and other requirements, which include the compliance component. From a systems point of view, you can look at that too. Annelie? All right.
Sorry, yes, thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you. And I will we will have a look at it when it comes to underwriting and,
yes,
from surveying, there's a lot of things that we also need to look at and make sure that we contribute to making it easy for everyone to comply.
It makes sense because you do that for like the fire risk as well.
Yes.
It's a process that is in place. I think it's a question of asking, does that process include environmental compliance as well?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay. I don't, Johan, I don't think it's the crop insurance component. I think it's more the short term. Annelie, correct me if I'm wrong. Johan is asking, does your question relate to short term or crop insurance?
Yeah,
I'm assuming you're talking about short term, right?
Short term, yeah.
That's it. All right. Thanks for that. Okay.
Lucinda, sorry, before you continue, can I maybe just ask everybody just to switch off their cameras, just for the bandwidth
Yes,
aspect? And yeah, then thanks, Lucinda. You can continue. If there are any questions, I think due to the time in the schedule, you are more than welcome to also send an email afterwards, and we'll definitely try and answer your questions as best we can. So yeah, thanks, Lucinda.
Gerard, I think what I'll do with the questions, if I get, I have shared my email address and it's also in the training material, but if I get a direct email with a question relating to this workshop, I will copy you and Annelien in on the response, and then maybe what we could do is we can create like a register with Q&A, insofar as I can answer them, of course, with Q&A, and then what you could probably share that as well
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
for the benefit
Thanks.
of everyone.
Perfect.
Okay, good. Thank you for that. Right, so we are on question number 5. What are the key fundamentals when I build and put together an environmental management system? All right, so again, if we look at ISO 14000, that environmental management system I referred you to just before the break, the international system. So what happens with this is it gives you a broad framework and you need to fill in the blanks. So it tells you, right, under leadership, you need leadership and commitment, environmental policy, and then you need to determine your organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities. Under that organizational roles, responsibilities, and authorities, you will then have to allocate specific responsibilities to persons. And I think this could actually fit in well, and we'll cross-reference it again when we look at questions. The last one, are there any formal appointments that need to be made? The environmental law, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but while we're looking at roles and responsibilities, there isn't a particular appointment like a 16.2 or a health and safety rep. You might, in your authorizations, your water use license or your waste management license or your air emissions license, see a requirement that a specific person has to be designated to be the point of contact and to drive compliance with the requirements. So you can convert that into an appointment if you want. But and I have put in an example of what we typically do. But you can see that roles and responsibilities and authorities need to be defined. And then under your planning, actions to address your risk and opportunities, links back to your risk assessment, as well as your section 24 EIA, environmental objectives and planning to achieve them, and then your support, resources, competence, awareness, communication, documented information. That's a key aspect of a system. Operational control and planning control, emergency preparedness and control. We get back to emergency preparedness and control. And then performance evaluation. How do you monitor, measure, analyze, and evaluate? Internal audit, that's when you do your own audit. We often do third-party audits on behalf of the clients to show their compliance. And then your management review, and then of course improvement. When you do pick up on non-conformances, what corrective actions are you taking and how are you driving towards continual improvement? So if you look at the elements of the environmental management system, it doesn't say thou shalt have a procedure dealing with management of change. Right, and that's what makes these systems, on face value, it makes it a little bit more difficult to just find a quick and easy, right, this is how we're going to do an environmental management system. I think that's the message, is there is no such thing as a quick and easy environmental management system. It requires effort and dedication. You cannot just slap environment onto a health and safety system and think that's going to be enough. We come across this a lot, where because we've got such well-established health and safety systems, we just want to add the E and call it an integrated system. You can have an integrated system, but you must make sure that you address specific things. Something as basic as incident management. If you look at the difference between incident management under the OSH Act and incident management under the environmental law. It is chalk and cheese. It's two different approaches. So you got to be very careful when you're looking at this. Now, I can tell you when we do environmental legal compliance audits, our audits would typically consist of two components. The first one is an admin audit where we look at documents and paperwork. So this is where most of the system related issues will come in. And the second part of the audit is a physical, where you walk around and look at what you see that under compliance. So I've just put in here, just as a guideline, I can't put the whole report in, but I want you to just get an idea. So under general, what we look at under general is what are you doing to make your employees aware of the right to the environment, and how are you complying with your duty of care, Section 28. Your protected disclosures, that's your protection of your whistleblowers, Section 31. How do you deal with integrated environmental management? That's that Section 23, Redwood Section 2 that we already looked at. Environmental impact assessment. What is your management of change? How do you consider before you've got the issue of load shedding right now? To counter the issue of load shedding, what you're going to do is you're going to install a generator and you need to store some diesel. Before you can install the generator and store the diesel, you need to see, do I need to get an authorization to do this? If you need to get an authorization, that EIA process, a basic assessment can take 6 to 8 months before you can get your authorization, because it's got a whole process linked to it. Scoping an EIA, which is the longer one, can take 8 to 12 months before you can even commence your activity. So this has to be done right in the early planning stages. Have you made provision for that? The employee's right to refuse to do environmentally hazardous work. How have you dealt with that? Section 29 of NEMA. Section 30 of NEMA, how are you managing your environmental incidents? I'm going to show you a lot more detail on environmental incidents just now. Your duty of care, what are you doing to remedy the environmental damage that you're causing, and to manage your environmental incidents? That's at non-conformances. And then legal and other requirements. How do you identify the legal requirements? How do you comply to the requirements? And then under our audit, we then look at specific things. So under each of these issues, waste management, we'll look at from your procedure right through to your waste practices, your compliance with your local bylaws, your water management, your air pollution control. How do you manage your dangerous and your hazardous substances? Public health, under public health, there are things like your offensive trades. Certain activities under your local bylaws need to be registered. If you've got food premises, your certificate of acceptability of your food premises under your local bylaws. Then we've got your fauna and flora and pest control. So from your pest control operator registration under the Fertilizers, Farm Feeds, Agricultural Remedies and Stock Remedies Act, which is an act that we haven't even talked about because it's not one of the CMAs, but it's something that has an impact. Your Veld and Forest Fire Act with your fire breaks and your managing that, your managing of your invader and alien species. You can see there's a lot of content under that. And then lastly, we also look at ambient noise control. So it's not noise control as in the OSH Act where you give somebody hearing protection. That's your occupational exposure. Here we are looking at your environmental exposure. So basically the noise that goes beyond your perimeters of your workplace. How are you managing that? Hold on for a second, sorry. I get so worked up with all of this. Sorry about that. So that's just basically all of these things would have to be things that you can show in some way that you are managing as well. So that would form part of your environmental management system. All right. Can we move on?
Happiness
So
is.
let's look at our next question. Environmental incidents. So what are our typical environmental incidents? Now, what is an environmental incident? I think that's what we need to start with. So now you would have picked up already, I like to go back to definitions because that's how we should be interpreting the law. But for environmental incidents, you don't find a definition in section 1. You find in section 31A of NEMA, you find a description of what is an incident. So to determine an environmental incident, it says it's so 3 things. Now bear with me. I'm going to give you a definition, then I'm going to show you how we apply this. All right, so bear with me. There's method in the madness. It means 3 things: unexpected, sudden, and uncontrolled. That's the 3 things: unexpected, sudden, and uncontrolled. Uncontrolled for us is very important because if you spill diesel in a abundant area, then it's controlled, right? So it still needs to be cleaned up, but it's not necessarily an environmental incident. Now, when we look at environmental incidents, we're looking at it, we have to identify it for the purpose of reporting it. If it is an environmental incident, but it's not reportable, you still need to clean it up in terms of section 28. That's where your duty of care comes in. But section 30 deals with the environmental incidents that must be reported. So that's our focus here. So it's an unexpected, sudden, and uncontrolled release of a hazardous substance, another key component. The substance is hazardous, including from, but not limited to, please remember this, including from, but it's not just these, a major emission, a fire or an explosion that causes, has caused, or may cause significant harm to the environment, human life, or property. So that's our starting point. So let's break it down. An incident is an unexpected, sudden, and uncontrolled release of a hazardous substance, including from a major emission, fire, or explosion that causes, has caused, or may cause significant harm to the environment, to human life, or to property. Now, the Department of then Environmental Affairs, now Forestries, Fisheries and Environment, released this document. Now, it's not a regulation. It wasn't incorporated under a particular act. It was circulated on their website, and that's how we came across this document. It's a very useful document. It's also the other extra document that I have included. So there's 3 things that I sent through. It's a PDF copy of the training material, 2 slides on a page. It's not in an editable or PowerPoint format for obvious reasons. It's a copy of that NERSA report, the National Environmental Compliance and Enforcement Report 2022-23. And then this guideline on the administration of incidents in terms of section 30. When you are going to write an incident management procedure, work through this document. Don't go to section 30 of the Act. Everything from section 30 is incorporated in this document, right? If I'm auditing your incident management procedure, I use this document. I'll show you why just now. All right. So now in this document, there is an Annexure 3. So do you remember, for something to be an incident, it must be a hazardous substance. So how do we know what is a hazardous substance? We go to Annexure 3 of this document. So if we open up this document, is it opening up? Wait. Let me bring it across. There we go. If we open up this document, I'm just going to show you annexures. So you can see there's 3 annexures. Okay, so the first annexure is section 30. That's good. The second annexure I've got in the material for us as well, a template of an incident report. Fantastic. You don't have to come up with your own incident report. You can use their template, right? And then number 3 is the alphabetical list of substances. So if we go to, and it's searchable, do you see this? Annexure 3, we go to Annexure 3, there we go. Now, if you look at Annexure 3 here, it's about 180 pages with a list of hazardous substances. So earlier on, I used the example of diesel, right? Okay, so let's see. Is diesel in fact hazardous? Is diesel in fact a hazardous substance? So we can't go on what you think. We have to see if our substance is listed here. So let's see. There we go. It's number 1130. Do you see how many we have on this list? There we have diesel fuel. That's the CAS code. You will also see the CAS code on your safety data sheet, your MSDS that you have for your diesel. You can see that it will be the same code here. And then you see the quantity is 100 liters, right? You see that 100 liters. So what you can do is you can go back to your workplace. You can look at what hazardous substances do we have, or what substance, hazardous substances, any substance for which you have a safety data sheet, right? Because your safety data sheet SANS 10234 is the classification of your chemical substances. So that's basically going to be, if you don't know what's hazardous, you can look at that. Then you go back to this list and you check in this list, where is my substance? Let's say we're doing some maintenance work and we're using paint. There we go. Then we go search. We have paint, including paint, lacquer, enamel, stain, shellac solutions, varnish, polish, liquid filler, and liquid lacquer base. Now it's not 100 liters, but it's 10. Do you see that? So you can really go and search in this document. You can work it back. So what list do I have? And then you go see what is the minimum quantity. The quantity, you'll understand why that becomes important just now. All right. So that's the key thing. That helps us with understanding what is a hazardous substance. So now the next question is, how do I then report my environmental incidents? Okay, now, firstly, we have to ask, who must report? So section 30, subsection 1B, says to us who is the responsible person, because the responsible person has to report. So who is the responsible person? Do you remember section 28? Who has the duty of care? Now you have something similar. Who is the responsible person? Owner, user, controller, section 28. Look at what we have here. The person responsible for the incident, the person who owns the hazardous substance involved in the incident, the person in control of the substance involved in the incident at the time of the incident. All right, so let's say it's my waste, my hazardous waste that is being transported to the waste disposal site, and the vehicle in which they transport it is in an accident, and there's a spill of my hazardous waste. Who is responsible to report it? It could be the person responsible for the incident, the waste transport company. It could be the person in control of the hazardous substance involved in the incident at the time of the incident. Again, the driver and the company, the transport company. Or it could be the owner of the hazardous substance involved in the incident. So it could also be me. So we have to be very clear on this. When do we have to take responsibility? If you don't look at section 31B, you might miss your own responsibility. Right, so that's the first thing. Who has to report? Now, the next thing is, who do they need to report to? Now, if it was the OSH Act, you know, within 7 days, you have to report your incident to the provincial director. Within 14 days, you have to report your incident to the chief inspector, and you're going to use the WCL forms. That's your incident procedure there. So what I said to you earlier is you can't just go and slap this onto the SHEQ procedure. And a lot of people just add a column that says environmental impact. That is not enough. With all due respect, it's not enough. Why? Because look at who you have to report to. You don't have to just report to one entity. As a minimum, the moment that something is an environmental incident, you are going to have to report it to at least 3, possibly 4 entities. The first one is the local council or municipality with jurisdiction over the area in which the incident occurs. So it's on your site, then it's the local council for your site. If it is on a road, right, and it might be out of the jurisdiction of your own local council, then you have to look at which municipality has jurisdiction. So that's the first one. Then the provincial department. The provincial head of the department or other provincial official designated for that purpose by the MEC in a province where the incident occurs. So your provincial, or if it is, if the incident relates to transportation and it's not in your own province, whichever province it occurs in. And then the Director General, the DG at the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and Environment. So the National Department of Environmental Affairs. So in other words, local. Do you remember the different types of legislation earlier on? Same thing here. National, provincial and local. And then any other DG of a national department. So now we're going to go and look at if it happens on a national road and we're spilling, then we might have to report to Department of Transport. Or if the chemical runs down the hill and ends up in a river, we have to report to Department of Water and Sanitation. So that's going to be the other department. Are you guys with me? Right, so now, how do we report? Now, this is where things get interesting. Now, everything I'm going to show you now, I took from that guideline document. So again, what I say to you is, go look, if you're responsible for managing incidents, go look at this guideline document. It is invaluable. And it comes from the actual department to whom you need to report. So, I mean, why do you want to go and do your own thing if you can do exactly what they tell you to do? They haven't made it compulsory. It's not compulsory, but it's common sense for me. All right. So now there's an incident. So let's say we spill some diesel. I'm going to use that as my example. All right. There's an incident. So the responsible person has to ask, is my substance on the list? What list? That list I just showed you, Annex 3. If my substance is not on the list, then I don't need to do any further action in terms of Section 30. But Section 28 is still going to be applicable. Remember, Section 28 is always there, your duty of care. So I still have to clean it up in terms of Section 28(3). Right? If my substance is on the list, then my next question is, how much of the substance was involved in the incident, right? Is it, now if we use diesel, is it less than 100 liters or more than 100 liters? If it's a combination or a mixture of substances, then you have to go and look at the most toxic one of them. All right. But for our purposes, we're using diesel as our example. All right. So now, how much did I spill? Did I spill more than 100 or less than 100? More than 100, it's an incident. Less than 100, it's not an incident. But it still needs to be cleaned up. So next step is it reportable in terms of the definition? What is the criteria there? 3 things, do you remember? Sudden, unexpected, and most importantly, uncontrolled. If it happened in a abundant area, it's controlled. It's not an incident, but I still have to clean it up. But if it's not in abundant area, then it is controlled. Okay, now it's an incident. So at this point, we now know it's an incident. So we go through all of this. Yes, it's an incident. If it's an incident, then we have to generate an alarm report. That's an immediate report where we have to let them know. And then we've got 14 days to submit our incident report. Right? Let's go back to Section 30. So what we've got here, and again, this comes from that guideline document. So you're going to see the actions. What do I need to do? And you can see the actual section that it comes from listed here as well. So you need to do the initial report of the incident to the authorities. That's the alarm report. It happens. You determine, is it an incident? You report it. Now, step 2 is contain and minimize the effects of the incident to the environment, health, safety, and property of persons. So that's similar to what we saw in section 28 as well. Then you have to start your cleanup procedures. You need to remedy the effects of the incident. Now, when you initially tell them, the department, that that incident has happened, they can give you further instructions. If at that point, even before you do your incident report, if they give you further instructions, you have to implement the further instructions that they give you. If you fail to implement those instructions, it's an offense. Just take note of that. Right. Now, you start with your cleanup procedures, you remedy the effects of the incident, and then you assess the immediate and long-term effects of the incident on the environment and public health. Right. And of course, depending on the outcomes there, you've got to implement corrective actions. And then you've got to submit your report within 14 days. So that's basically the legal, the breakdown of the responsible person, owner, user, controllers, responsibilities. Okay, so now let's look at the next question. We're busy with how do I report? So what do I report? Now, how do I report it? We know where to report it to. So for this, we go back to the guideline. And if you battle with this, we've retyped this report format already. It is in the document. So if you really battle with it, yeah, I can probably get a Word version of this, and Annalene and Gerard send to you guys as well. But it's you can copy and paste from the document as well. It's just in tables. So you know, I would go with this format. If I'm doing an audit, I always make a recommendation. It's not necessarily a non-compliance, but I always make a recommendation that you revert to this format because it covers everything that the department wants. So let's look at what they want. So we start with, this is the top again. This is now from that guideline document, Annexure 2. So this is how they start with it. You've got your incident report, the title for your incident, the date, your reference, your revision number, who compiled it, and your initial submission date. Okay, so that makes sense. Now, if you look at this template, it says this form provides a template for the emergency incident report. Now, emergency incident is actually an outdated reference. Section 30 used to only deal with emergency incidents. But since the original report guideline came out, this is an updated guideline, but they've still got here and there, they forgot to take emergency out. It's not just for emergency incidents. It's all environmental incidents. Even the heading of section 30 changed. It used to be emergency incidents, but it is now just incidents. Okay, so this is the report that you have to submit within the 14 days. And they say to you, this is what an incident is. And then look at what they cross-reference here. So there's your section 31A. That's what we already looked at. What is an incident? And look at what it says here. In line with, what did we start with today? We started with section 24 of the Constitution, the grandmother. Serious is taken to be a measure of the impact of an incident where the incident has had, could have had, or is having, or will have a negative impact on human health or well-being or the environment, of course. All right. Responsible person. So the first part is we're going to put and again, there you see 31B that we looked at. It's in there as well. So we've got the details of the responsible person that we put in there. So the next one is emergency incident summary of the information. So now you go and you see, right, what were the What were the consequences? Don't get too bogged down with numbering issues. I think it's just, it should have been picked up in the quality control, but it wasn't, right? So was it a fire? Was it a spill? Was it an explosion, a gaseous emission? Were there injuries? Was it open? What were there? Open water impacts, groundwater impacts, soil impacts. So do you remember that definition of an incident? It said including from a major emission. Do you remember those three things? And I said to you, that's not all, because it could literally include all of these. So you can see there's a whole bunch of criteria that you can look at there up. And then if there's something that's not there, but that might still impact, you can add a sub 25. Now, your initial incident report. Now, again, you'll see what they do with this report. They put the legal requirement in. And then they say to you, do you remember? Local, provincial, national. So here we go. When did you submit it? What time? How did you submit it? And who did you submit it to? So your local council, your provincial, your DG of your environmental affairs, and any other one. So there's all for the possible authorities that we looked at. So now let's look at the incident details. Where did the incident happen? When did it start? What time? How long did it go on for? How long was your exposure? And then a description of your incident. A background, your operation, your type of incident, your root cause of your incident. Remember, this is the report you're going to submit after 14 days. So you would have done your root cause analysis, your incident investigation already. What were your contributory factors? And then what is your conclusion? Now, interesting, and this is something you shouldn't miss. They look at things like, depending on applicability, of course, wind speed and direction, ambient air temperature, weather conditions. So when we're doing the investigation, we should ideally be looking at these things as well, so that if it's not applicable, we can at least mark not applicable because we have considered it. So now, what pollutants were released during the incident? Right, and there's your quantity again. So is it liters or kilograms, right, that you're measuring it? So now we can go back to that. Now we go back to that list. You remember the list? The reference number in that Annexure 3, we can find that information in Annexure 3. All right. So that's your pollutants released. What secondary pollutants that resulted from your mitigating measures? So in other words, if you, if they were, there was a fire, and because of the fire, they had to use water, and because of all chemicals to control the fire. So what were the secondary pollutants that resulted from managing the incident, for instance? Then the concentrations of the pollutants, and then the impact of your incident. So you can see under part 8, is it that what impacts did this particular incident have? Biological, fatalities, hospitalization, injuries, the area, was it informal settlement situated next to you? Was it a sensitive environment or a protected area, or anything along the lines of that? So what existing prevention procedures or systems do you have in place to manage this, right? Then your technical measures, your failures on that, your procedural system failures. So you can see this is the kind of detail we're looking at here. I don't think that if it's 100 liters of diesel, you're necessarily going to go to all of this extent. It would be a shorter version of this report, right? Depending on the impact, of course. It depends on the impact. So what did you do with your initial incident management? your cleanup or decontamination that you did, the information around cleanup and decontamination. And then what mitigating measures did you implement? And then what becomes important now is what authorizations do you have? Do you have a water use license? Do you have a air emissions license? This is important because if you fail to properly clean up and manage this, the department can actually revoke or suspend any licenses that you have pending action by you. So if you fail to take action, the department can actually suspend your operations pending that action. So in a way, force you to comply. So they want to know the details of any authorizations that you have, and this can be your effluent discharge permit or your air emissions license, local, provincial, or national authorizations that you have. And then, has this happened before? Now, has this happened before is very important because we want to look at, if it has happened before, what have you done? What corrective actions? So if you go back to system, do you remember non-conformances and corrective actions? What have you done to prevent this from happening again? Were you negligent in the way that you managed your incident in the first place? Right, so that's your history, then you sign it. Now in this appendix, you're going to note then in Annexure 2, it's got 3 appendices. Appendix 1 is a list of people affected by the results of the incident, and then a layout map of the area likely to be affected by your incident. Now again, do you recall the incident that happened in KZN with the explosion of that factory? It was actually satellite during, I think it was 2 years ago. Do you remember we had those KZN unrests, and then they satellite the factory. The name escapes me now. I think I can't remember. It's an acronym. But in any way, so they brought in the fire department. They were supposed to register as an MHI, and they never registered as an MHI. And the fire department came in, and then they were extinguishing the fire, but they didn't really know what the chemicals were, so they didn't apply the correct ways to extinguish the fire, which caused a lot of runoff water, which then contaminated the whole estuary and area around it in KZN. It's there, Salt Rock, Umhlanga, that area. So I remember the beaches that year. You couldn't go to the beaches. That was the whole impact. So we're looking at a smaller incident, but we're also looking at something that has such a huge impact. So basically, it's quite a wide scope that could fall under an incident. Right now, one thing I want you to just take note of is here at the end, there's a disclaimer. Any other information not covered in the reporting template must also be included. So if there's something, although this is quite comprehensive, you must agree, but if there's something that you come across that appears to be relevant, then you should also include that. And then the last bit, right at the end, it says, in terms of section 3011 of NEMA, you are further advised that failure to comply with these subsections that require the reporting constitutes an offence, and you may be liable on conviction to a fine not exceeding 5 million rand or imprisonment not exceeding 5 years, and in the case of a second or subsequent conviction, to a fine not exceeding 10 million or imprisonment not exceeding 10 years, in both instances to both the fine or imprisonment. So in other words, it's a criminal offence not to report. It's not algae. It wasn't algae. I'm going to tell you now which one it was. I wanted to include it in the training material, but but I didn't think we were going to have enough time. But I'll tell you now what the incident was. I've got it. It's UFC or something like that. I'm gonna check it now. I don't want to speculate. Just now I'm using the wrong acronym and then I get myself into trouble. Right, guys. So if you look at it, you can agree that it's quite comprehensive, right? It is quite a comprehensive incident reporting template that we use. Now, you could use this as a starting point, and then you could apply it in your, again, they never incorporated it as this specific requirement. Okay, so that's the one thing. So there's nothing that says thou shalt use this template, but I'm saying to you, if this is what the department brought out in the guideline, this is what we should consider when we are putting together our own incident management procedure. UPL, yes, Dion, you're right, it's UPL, it was UPL. So you can go back to your existing incident management procedure. And if you have got the integrated one that I was talking about earlier, where you do health, safety, and environment, what I would then suggest is that in your procedure, you split it, right? So on the one, you deal with health and safety. You can do it in the same procedure, but at least split it, because you have to, even if you don't use this template, you have to, as a minimum, comply with the requirements of Section 30. And that is not, it's not the same as the SHEQ procedure. So if you integrate it, just go with two streams. On the one hand, you deal with your health and safety, and on your other hand, you deal with your environmental, and then use this as a guideline to just update your procedure. Right. So we have reached the last question. Are there any formal appointments that need to be made, like we have in the SHEQ? You know, in the SHEQ, you've got your engineer and you've got your CEO and your 16.2. Do we have something similar? Like I said to you before, under that ISO standard, there isn't a particular responsible person. You can see even with your liability, any person, it doesn't even just talk about an employer. If you do go to section 30 of the Act, 34 of the Act, which is your polluter pays that I referred to earlier on, what you will note is in section 34 of the Act, it says that the employer can be held liable for a negligent act or omission by his employee, right? So this is limited to a fine. Then the employee, the agent, or the manager or the director can be held liable in addition to or as if they were the employer. So you've got, again, joint and several liability. There's a requirement for directors, which says the director at the time of the offense can, in his personal capacity, be held liable. So that means that the director who failed to take action can be held liable. So in the court cases, for instance, there's Gold View Mining, where these guys were mining in a wetland. And in that case, the company and 5 of its employees were prosecuted. And in Nkomati anthracite, which is another case where the guys, if I remember correctly, they extended a road without a proper environmental authorization. And then in that case, they didn't go after the directors or the employees. They just penalized, or they just prosecuted the company. And then in Blue Platinum Ventures, that's another court case where it took some time, but it was basically, again, a mining type operation. It was a brickyard where they caused damage to the environment, to the surrounding community, their ancestral lands. They caused a lot of corrosion. In that case, they prosecuted the Maponya was his surname. They prosecuted him, and he was found guilty. And then instead of giving him a fine and imprisonment and suspending the this was in Mpumalanga, no, it wasn't in Mpumalanga, it was in Sanin, where instead of giving him a fine, it was the first time the court didn't give a fine but gave jail time. So the court in for Maponya and Blue Platinum Ventures, they gave him jail time of 5 years, but it was suspended pending him rehabilitating the area within 3 months. And it was estimated just under 7 million rand, the rehabilitation. So in other words, the outcome of the court case was actually that if he didn't, the director, if he didn't rehabilitate the area, he would go to jail instead of there being a fine. So that's the one thing that I really enjoy about the environmental law is if you're looking for court cases to support your argument as to why, you know, if it's not just your environmental responsibility, but you want to motivate, there's actually quite a number of court cases that we can use to say, all right, or even this Nurser report that I referred to earlier on, that we can use to say, all right, this is what has been happening. We can see there's evidence to show how the Department of Environmental Affairs or Fisheries, Forestries and Environment, how they action compliance, how they manage compliance. It's not unrealistic because what would happen mostly if an inspector does come to your site, they don't go straight for prosecution. What they would do is they would give you a pre-directive or a pre-compliance notice. So in other words, a warning that they're going to warn you, to give you the opportunity to implement the necessary steps. And if that doesn't work, then they would go to a compliance notice, depending, of course, on the seriousness of the environmental impact. They would go to a compliance notice or a directive. In both instances, you need to understand that failure to comply with the compliance notice is also an offense, right? So then it's only in the absence of action in that case, and in all cases, if they give you a directive and you fail to take action, then they can actually take the action on your behalf to manage the impact on the environment, and then you will have to reimburse the department for the cost of this, right? And it's only when that doesn't work do they go for prosecution. So it's not straight to prosecution. There's a whole process, and you can follow that process if you look at these Nurser reports. All right. So now, are there any formal appointments that need to be made? No, there isn't a formal appointment. There might be one in your license or your authorization that says you have to make an appointment. So what we've done for clients in the past is when the clients say to us, but wait a minute, I want my engineer to also take responsibility for environment, or I want my SHEQ manager to also take responsibility for environment. At best, what we usually recommend is, but it has to go hand in hand with training. But it doesn't help that you give somebody an environmental responsibility and you haven't trained them. Remember what section 28.3.2 said, the reasonable steps that you have to take. Inform your employee of the environmental impact of their activities and the manner in which they must perform their functions to avoid causing pollution or degradation. So it's important that with environmental responsibilities, you do make sure that the employee has the necessary training. So what we then do is in our appointment letters, we would add an environmental duty of care. And this brings me back to section 28. That's where this environmental duty of care comes from. So if we look at it, you are specifically responsible to ensure, now this is what we put in the appointment letters. You are specifically responsible to ensure that relevant environmental legislative requirements are complied with, including the implementation of all internal procedures and systems to ensure compliance with the legislation. In this regard, your attention is drawn to the provisions of NEMA section 28. This section stipulates that every person who causes, has caused, or may cause, if this sounds familiar, we did it, significant pollution or degradation to the environment must take reasonable measures to prevent the pollution or degradation from occurring, continuing, or reoccurring. Or insofar as harm to the environment is authorized by law or cannot be reasonably avoided or stopped, to minimize and rectify the pollution or degradation of the environment. And then we go back to reasonable measures, which is 28.3. Investigate, assess, and evaluate the impact, seize, modify, or control in any act or, causing the pollution or the degradation, and remedy the effects of the degradation. This duty is applicable to, among others, an owner of land, you know that, owner, user, controller, and then failure to comply with this duty could result in a competent authority issuing a directive against the person who is causing, has caused, or may cause a significant pollution or degradation to the environment. That's the company or the person. So that would typically be what we then put into. You can, of course, have your own component. It could be aligned with your ISO 14000 responsibility. So if you've implemented an ISO 14000 system, then this can actually cross-reference the responsibilities or duties in terms of ISO 14000 as well. So, you know, you could add that, then you could do a separate appointment letter, or you could add this to an existing appointment letter. Word of caution again, make sure that if you do allocate this responsibility, you make sure that the person you're giving the duty to understands the duty. If they do not understand the duty, the consequences, and the law, and remember, they don't have to reinvent the wheel, because you're going to have an environmental management system that's going to be the vehicle for compliance. So as long as you equip them with the necessary means through your system to perform these functions, then you can actually give them this responsibility, and they should take note of the fact that they've got a responsibility. Does that mean that if I don't have this in my appointment letter, I don't have responsibilities? No. You can confirm a person's responsibilities in different ways. An appointment letter is one. It could be through your system or a procedure or an instruction. It could be done in different ways. All right. I think that brings me to the end of my discussions. What you'll see there's an email address or a cell phone number if you want to send me a notice or ask me a question. As I said, what I'm going to do with these questions, if I do get them, when I answer, I'll copy Gerard and Annelien into the questions. So if you wanted to create a area where you put all the responses, we can do that as well.
Awesome. Lucinda, thank you very much. I'm chuckling because I think there's a lot of work that needs to go into this, and I think, you know, we had the discussion before the session as well. You know, this sort of just is an overview of what it really entails, and it really does go into depth regarding the environmental compliance. So I think from my side, thank you very, very much. I think there's a lot of value that you added into practical aspects that we can go back and implement in our businesses. And yeah, I think sort of put it together very, very well. So thank you very much from my side. Annelies, I don't know from your side if there's anything from your side at this stage.
Just also to thank Lucinda for an excellent and very comprehensive presentation. Yourself, Gerard, once again for the great work that you're doing with these SHEQ workshops. Annelien, who's also putting in a lot of work, and for all of those of you who took the time out today to attend this workshop, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Annelies. Thank you very much for everybody attending.
Give me 1 second. Sorry, Gerard.
Yes,
There
yes,
is one question that came in from John Sheffer. If you were interested in becoming an environmental assessment practitioner, IPASA, the Environmental Assessment Practitioner Association of South Africa, So that's the one, that would be the starting point. John, if you send me an email or a WhatsApp, I will give you the IPASA links, or if I can quickly come across them now. And then environmental law is so broad. How would one go about identifying specific compliance requirements with new installations? You literally have to look at that's why with new installations, firstly, you have to see if you need an authorization for the new installation. If you need an authorization for the new installation, you're going to have to go and appoint an environmental assessment practitioner. That has to be your first step. So you have to appoint an environmental assessment practitioner, and they will then manage this for you. You'll see, John, I've put the website address for the Environmental Assessment Practitioners Association of South Africa in just after your question, so you can see it there. Go have a look at whenever we make use of an environmental assessment practitioner, we actually double check that they are in fact registered, because if you make use of somebody and they're not competent, the section 24 says they have to be competent, so they need to be independent and competent. If they're not, then the department can actually reject their report and instruct you to, at your own cost, have a further report done. So it's very important. You must verify the competency of your of the environmental assessment practitioners that you make use of. So for a new installation, you're going to start with checking if, so NEMA has a list of activities, the Waste Act has a list, you have to go look at all those activities, see if you need authorizations, then you appoint the EAP. If you don't need to appoint the EAP, then you literally have to go take every one of these acts, look at what, that's where we would typically use the legal register. What acts apply to you? What regulations apply to you? And is there specific requirements under that? Sorry, that was meant to be a quick answer, as we still have a little bit of time.
Thank you, Lucinda. I see there are a couple of questions coming through, guys. Please, just for time's sake and so on, kindly send it through to Lucinda. And I think it's a good idea that we put together just a quick feedback email where we sort of post the questions and answers and just give that through to you, which will be obviously in a week or two's time. But yeah, once again, Lucinda, I think thank you very much. I think it gives us a lot to go back and implement and to use as well. I think something that really stood out for me was the guidelines as well. You know, what sort of struck me is the tools are there. We just need to know about them and use them. So thank you very much for that. To everybody, thank you very much for the time, and we'll then also communicate through to you our next workshop, when it will be, and that will then obviously come from Annalene as well. All the best. Have a great day and week. Cheers, guys.
Thank you, everyone, for your time. Thank you, Gerard.
Cheers.